Welcome! Hello, my name is Tony, and I'd like to talk to you about some of the projects and adventures I've been on with NOFA, New Jersey. So in this series, we are going to enable all of you to be able to have your own backyard garden or front yard garden, or just to normalize the idea of everyone being able to raise some of their own food, supplementing your nutrition with stuff that you've grown. There's nothing more awesome and magical than picking a strawberry right from your own little strawberry patch, or chopping up a cucumber on a hot day and just munching it. Delicious, awesome stuff. So in this series, you are going to be equipped with all the information that you need to start your very own garden. So I'm really glad that you're here. I hope that you stay tuned and watch the upcoming episodes as we release. This first episode will be more about bed prep and how to get your garden prepared and how to choose the right spot for your garden, or how to make do with the spot you've got for your garden. Through the season, we'll get to how to maintain and weed, how to harvest, how to water, and so on. So glad you're here. I hope that you have a wonderful time, and I'm thankful that you're watching.
My name is Nate Kleinman. I'm the co-director of the Experimental Farm Network. We're a nonprofit based in Philadelphia. I'm a farmer in southern New Jersey, Salem County, in the town of Elmer. I'm here also as one of the co-founders of the Cooperative Gardens Commission, which we started at the beginning of the pandemic. And here is the Drumthwacket.
Can you say that again?
We're here at Drumthwacket.
Drumthwacket. I want to know who came up with that name.
Hi, I'm Tamia McQueen, and I'm here at Drumthwacket Gardens with NOFA and Rutgers University, just getting the edible gardens going for the season.
I'm Al Johnson. I am the Vice President of NOFA New Jersey, and I'm also Chair of the Education Committee.
So my name is Jessie DeCellis, and I'm the Residence Director here at Drumthwacket.
Hi, I'm Ariana Lindberg. I am an instructor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at Rutgers University.
Hi, I'm Robin Brenner. I am the Executive Director of the Drumthwacket Foundation. The foundation is the nonprofit, nonpartisan arm of Drumthwacket, and we take care of the property, which is a nationally landmarked historic site.
Everybody wants to know, what is the etymology of Drumthwacket?
Absolutely. It's probably the most asked question. So Drumthwacket was built by Governor Olden, Charles Smith Olden, and he was of Scottish descent. And we believe that it's a Scottish Gaelic word meaning to beat the drum or wooded hill. And it's a name that's just sort of stuck with the residents ever since.
I'm part of a group called the Cooperative Gardens Commission, which we started at the beginning of the pandemic. And we're trying to encourage more people to grow as much food as they can during the pandemic and beyond.
During this crazy COVID time, we all got to experience the hiccups and delays in the distribution chains, which really kind of allowed people to understand, wow, this food has to travel to get to me. And for whatever reason, it's not able to get from state to state to state. I was very proud this season to see people connecting with their local farmers, really trying to establish a relationship with where the food comes from.
There's so many places around the country that could be producing food instead of just producing lawn. So we're trying to get as many people as possible doing that this year. One of the things that Cooperative Gardens does is we distribute free seeds to anybody who needs them. Folks can go to coopgardens.org and sign up to be a seed hub in their community and distribute seeds to people in need.
Nice, nice.
So we're here today on the first day of this garden has been visited since our plantings came out last fall. When we approached it last fall, it was late season, and so the plantings were kind of a little bit disorganized when we installed them, and so this season we're going to go about it with a bit more organization, and also in terms of what the chef is really hoping to use for the events here at Drumthwacket. We didn't do any real kind of cover cropping last season. As you can tell, the soil is pretty it's pretty nice soil for veggie gardening, a high sand content. Things did grow really well without much in the way of amendments. So today, I think, first what we want to do is turn over the soil, rake out all the weeds. We do have some additional soil that we can put down, and then we're going to mark out these beds for planting so that we can really kind of maximize production for the chef to use. So I think it probably makes sense to kind of work our way this way. We have a little bit of transplanting to do with the perennial herbs that came back. But I think, this season it'll be important to really kind of maximize the limited space that we have. So in terms of what's your favorite weeding bed prep method? Al, tell me.
Sure. Yeah, if I were to look at this, I'd say it's pretty typical of a garden in the spring, particularly if you're in a community plot where it may be your first year in there, somebody else had it the year before. You're going to find a lot of weeds. If you're lucky, actually, you'll find a lot, a nice winter cover crop, but that apparently didn't get established last year. And I know that last year was fall. There was some dry spells, which weren't really good for planting that cover crop. But if I were to look at this, I say I got two things I would address first. One is you got to do something with those weeds, and there's two options. One is I could use my hoe and chop them into the soil, and they would break down eventually and provide some fertility. But we're planning on planting fairly soon, so I'm thinking that I would probably go over those, hoe them out, and I'll show you a couple ways to do that before I did anything else. And they haven't really, a couple of exceptions, they haven't really produced seed yet. So they're still really a good source of compost. If they had seed, particularly if it's a mature seed, I would be a little less likely to throw them on the compost pile. So that's number one. And number two is, this whole area is considered a bed. It's actually got sides on it. You can see about a foot down. But I consider each one of these planting areas to be a bed in itself, a raised bed. And when you think of a raised bed, you don't have to have wooden sides. It's like, that's a big cost. And it's certainly nothing wrong with them, particularly if you've got an area where you need to build up the soil because of some kind of long-term contamination. But the second thing I would do after I dealt with the weeds is to make a pathway. And you remember, you don't need the soil in the pathway to plant. So I always, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute, but I always make a pathway by digging a little trench and throwing that up on the bed, because that's perfectly good soil, and there's no sense in walking on your perfectly good soil. And there are advantages of having that raised bed in there too. So,
yep.
Now,
what are those advantages, Al?
What's that? What
are those advantages?
Well, first of all, the raised bed will kind of it warms a little bit faster in the spring because it's got that side that can warm up as well as the top of the soil. And then the other is you don't tend to get puddling in raised beds. You just have if any excess water is going to go to the pathway. And again, we're not planting on the pathway. So if I were to attack those weeds, I'll show you what probably most of you would have access to is going to be a hoe. These are not that expensive. They're available at all gardening supply stores, and it's not the best tool for doing this, but it's not bad. And I don't really have to dig deep. As a matter of fact, I'm going to try not to dig deep for a number of reasons. But I can go a few inches down, and I'm basically trying to get the roots out. And I'm going to come back later and just rake those out. Again, if I wasn't going to plant this for a while, I can also chop them into the soil. This is really sandy soil, so this is not hard. But the fact that we're going to plant this right away, I want to get rid of those, because the fact that they're breaking down in the soil, they're going to take nitrogen away from the plants. The bacteria that will decompose these needs that nitrogen. Our plants need that nitrogen, so you get a competition in there that's it's not to our benefit. So there are better tools to do that with. This is a type of shuffle hoe, and you can see it's like a blade. There are other shuffle hoes that you've probably seen them. They're stirrup looks like a horse syrup because I can even step in it like that. And I don't think we have any here today, do we? No, we don't have any. But the idea with these is I'm standing up straight. This blade is flat on the surface, almost flat on the surface of the soil. So when I drag it through, I'm not digging it into the soil, which is hard on my back. I'm dragging it on the surface of the soil and dragging those roots right out. Now this particular, a lot of these weeds in here are, there's some chickweed, and they tend to have very fibrous roots. So you might have to dig down a little bit more than I would normally want to dig down. And one of the reasons I'm not trying to disturb the soil too much is because this is really pretty nice soil. And you don't really need to turn it over every year. It's work, but the fact that it is nice soil, if I dig a little bit out, and you can see some of that darker organic matter is probably left over from last year's compost, but it actually breaks apart, and you can almost see pea-size, what I call pea-size bits of soil in there. And those are basically the what we call the aggregation of the soil creates air pockets. And if I was to go through here with a rototiller, it'll break a lot of those up. So that would tend to compact the soil more. I want those little pea-sized aggregates in there because that's what your water's going to go through, filter in through. That's what your roots are going to grow through. And you know, it's just a long-term benefit for the soil that you want to try to disturb it as little as possible. Now, if this was sod, first-time garden, I'd be doing a whole different thing. But it's not. It's been gardened before, and so basically, I'm just going to try to get rid of these weeds.
If I can add,
sure.
One of the things that I would say is that, you know, the beauty of these weeds is that they're pretty shallow rooted.
Yeah.
So if you're starting in a garden for the first time that hasn't been planted, and you're trying to pull out something that has a deeper taproot, or or plant that has been put in, where you're trying to pull out something a bit deeper, then you really don't want to leave those plants in the ground because they'll come back. So you want to make sure that that might be something that you have to take a deep shovel to, or you might dig out with a hand trowel, in order to sort of keep those from coming back. Especially, like Al said, if you're planting in it straight away, you want to make sure that you're not having some deep root in there that you're going to have to turn around and take out in the middle of your vegetable plants in your garden.
Yeah, some of these spring weeds, that soil is sticking together because the roots are holding it there. Yeah. That's the roots you're talking about. And they're really fibrous. I'd like to actually leave those in the soil, it'd be good for the soil, but if I did, it would create a problem later on. So, there's a decision you have to make. Do I knock all that soil off before I take it to the compost pile, or bring it to the compost pile? It's good. It'll make good compost.
Because you hate to get rid of it, don't you?
Yeah, you need to get rid of it though. Yeah.
Well, there we go. So you can see these are grubs. You want worms. You don't want these characters, because they actually eat the roots of your plants and grass. And so quite often, if you do have a lawn, if you have grubs, you'll be able to just peel the lawn back. And with your vegetable plants, we're going to take these guys and chuck them out. They can actually damage your plant from the bottom up. So we're just going to take them and just chuck them out. The birds will thank you. And the other thing that we're doing is just pulling out some of your deeper rooted weeds. You're going to just, you might not want to, but you just might have to take a shovel and snatch them out. It's just the reality of preparing your bed. But the thing is that once you've done it, it's done. You don't have to keep coming back. And the only ones that you might have to pull later will be the more shallow rooted ones that you can just come in and pick out. But you want to get anything with this kind of really serious rooting out, because it'll haunt you. You'll fill your beds up with good quality compost or soil, or top them up and give them wonderful fertile ground to keep coming back if you don't get them out. So make sure that when you're planting your beds, you do the work first that needs to be done, so it doesn't haunt you years later.
I'm going to start I'm making my bed now first by making my pathway. And again, I don't need that soil in the pathway. And there's a lot of advantages to having it on where my plants are gonna grow. And this can be a permanent pathway too. You gotta make it wide enough for yourself. I would recommend at least 18 inches. If you have kids or you're in a public area, you might want it a little wider, maybe 2 foot. And you notice I'm always working from the side of the bed. I don't even want to step on my beds. Yeah, you can see the worms in there. So it makes, that's a good point of this is really good soil in here. I don't want to use it just to walk on. I want to use it to grow some of my seedlings. And I can go, if I got really good soil, I can go a little bit deeper, but it's really up to you. Any kind of shovel will work, doesn't really matter. One of the hardest things is making a straight line. Every once in a while I'll have to step back and say, yeah, looks good, just keep going. Yeah, got a couple worms in there at one point. We've got our pathways made, threw a lot of that soil up on top. So now I'm going to do what I call a rough forming of the bed, and just kind of flatten it out a little bit, because I don't want a mound that's round. I want something because actually water will just run off of that. So I want something that's flat, that's going to catch the water. And but I'm just doing what I call a rough flattening right now, and I say rough because there's a couple more steps first. Now, if you have your own compost or your municipality has compost, you can get it by the bucket. This municipality we're living in actually has some that you can just basically take a trash barrel and fill it up. And I spread a light sprinkling on the top. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. Now, if you don't have access to compost, you can buy it at a lot of garden supply stores. This one happens to be a leaf compost, but you can get things made of mushroom soil. They may have dehydrated manure, and I wouldn't use that in the spring. If you're applying this in the fall for the next year, that's all right, but it's not very well broken down. So there's two reasons you wouldn't want to use that, is because it's got to break down in the soil before it's available to the plants, number one. And number two, when anything that's going through the composting process is completed, it's a lot less volume. So you're paying for the volume of cow manure, and it's not nearly the nutrient value you would have in a finished compost. So again, this is pretty easy to just spread out. If you get it in by the truckload, or you in a community garden that gets in by a truckload, you can put on more than that, but this is pretty good soil. So I'm thinking that it's probably enough. Now, there's two more steps. I'm going to rake that in a little bit, and you don't have to dig it in. You've heard of there's such a thing as double digging a bed, and that can be done. It's okay, but I haven't done that in years. I don't think there's much of a need for it, but I don't want it all on the surface of the soil, so I'm just digging in a little bit. And this is a really good tool for doing that, just a regular garden rake. Not going very deep. Okay, so 2 more steps. If you're working with fairly tight soil, you might want to loosen it up a little bit. There's a tool, it's called a broad fork, that probably a lot of garden supply or seed companies have. I know Johnny's sells a version. Usually I don't see those in local garden supply stores. But I don't have one. I've never had one, even though I do always grow in beds. But I do have this digging fork. And this one happens to be a Smith & Hawken. It's a really high quality. If you have really tight soil, you can bend the tines. I've done a little bit of that, but it's pretty good. And so, again, if your soil's tight, I just basically will go down just to loosen it up a little bit. Make sure those roots will be able to infiltrate. And this broad fork will be, you can get broad forks that are the whole width of the bed. So, it saves you time, but I don't know, they probably cost $100. So it's just not, with a fork as good as the one I have, I've never seen a reason to buy one. And this is the fairly sandy soil we're working with, so it may not actually need it, but it never hurts. If you got an extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah, sometimes it comes out in chunks like that, and I go back and I just hit it, kind of breaks it apart. Looks like hard work. It's not actually. I just put all my weight into it when I go into the soil. Now these beds are about 3 feet wide, which is it's a good width. You can reach them from both sides, pathways on both sides, and it gives you a pretty good planting bed. So I'm gonna actually do 3 rows of these. On my precious top of my topsoil, still on the top, with a little bit of compost mixed in, but I am creating some pathways for air drainage, and it doesn't hurt to get a little bit of compost mixed down in the bottom layer either, but it's more important on the surface, close to the surface I should say. Yeah, and the huffing and the puffing is real, but it's not too bad. Now I'm getting in a little bit heavier soil. It's caked together a little bit. So I'm glad I did it. I probably would have really needed it down this end. The flatter the better, because even though this is raised and I've kind of aerated it, you can get puddles forming on the top, which if it gets too wet weather, some of those seeds can rot. So you'll notice I've got a slanting side there. Now a lot of raised beds you'll see have wood on the sides. I don't really feel there's a need for it. Now there'll be a little bit of erosion during the course of the summertime. So next year when I come in to form this bed again, I'll probably take a half an inch of soil out of that just by scraping it up like that. Bring it back up to the surface. But I just made those pathways today, so I'm not going to do it. But you can see you can use both sides of your rake, an essential tool, to make a flat bed. And depends upon what we're going to plant. We can get probably 2 staggered rows of tomatoes. We can get probably 3 staggered rows of lettuce, carrots, and some of the greens I think we're going to plant today are probably going to be 5 or 6 rows. And the reason I want to show you this now, even though we haven't planted, is this is how I decide how far apart to put my rows.
The seeds we'll be putting in this first bed are pretty fine, so we want to make sure that this top layer is pretty well prepared.
Yep. You got it. I'm gonna go grab my
backpack. Right now, just especially, if you're doing transplants, having a rough bed is totally fine. But we're gonna be putting in a greens mix, so a baby kale, kind of kale salad, mustard mix, and radishes. And those seeds are pretty itty bitty, so we want to have kind of a nice fine surface layer. They're going to have a very shallow planting. Kind of rule of thumb, planting depth is dependent on seed size. So the smaller the seed, the shallower the planting. In a moment I can show you those seed sizes, but we'll kind of quickly try to go over this bed so that we can start putting in some rows of the radish and greens mix. So in this second bed, we're going to need to put in trellising for the peas. So we'll do a double row of peas. One will be the snap peas, one will be snow peas. We don't have the trellis material with us today, but we'll mark it out with these bamboo so we can keep a straight line and a double planting, so on either side of the string, and then the peas will grow up. Pea seeds will be planted about somewhere between 1/2 inch and 1 inch. So I'm just doing a kind of a marker along here that we can plant in. And again, like I said, we will have trellis material set up after the seeding is done. But just to give us a sense of where these seeds will be so we can have a somewhat straight row. And then the nice thing, so this particular tool that we met earlier, the scuffle hoe, can be used for cultivating along the rows when you do get the initial growth of weeds, and we can kind of get it in between these two rows as well. So it's a tool of many uses, well worth the investment. So we're seeding these on the close side. They'll have 2 sides to grow up the trellis. And so we're putting them just about 1 inch apart, and that'll also, if we have any failure of germination, also ensure that we still get some good growth. So. And if there are too many, you can always eat the pea shoots and thin out your crop. So if you can see, we've got all the seeds kind of laid out. They don't have to be perfectly spaced. But then if you have this little trench, right, this little channel that you're planting in, you can just very quickly go back over and cover those seeds up, and it's going to be about the right amount of soil, right? And then I always go back down and kind of tamp it down just so that when we water, it doesn't, the soil doesn't, just fall away. Most seeds need darkness in order to germinate. There are a few that do require some light, but those are much less common. The other ones like to hibernate in the dark for a bit. And if the weather stays warm like this, we should see sprouts from these peas in about a week. So they're pretty quick. And that's a good kind of marker to look for. So now that this first bed is prepped, so we have a finer top layer for seeding these small seeds, we're going to start out with 3 rows and probably leave room for a 4th one that we can seed in another week or week and a half, so that we have kind of a succession planting going. So this first row is going to be a kale and mustard mix, so a small kind of baby lettuce mix that we call like a cut and come again mix. So you can do a harvest, it'll grow back in a week to a week and a half. You can do multiple harvests from a single sowing. And then we have a couple of different varieties of radish that we'll put in. Radishes are a great crop for beginners. They don't take up a whole lot of space, and they're super quick. So they have usually around a 21 to 24 day seed to harvest turnaround. So we're going to start that here. Again, I'm going to space them approximately the width of this cultivator hoe, so that we can run down the row between for any cultivating of small weeds. And that will give them enough space to have plenty of nutrients. So I'm going to use the same kind of technique, where this way I'm just going to do a super shallow kind of marker, more so that I have a straight line versus a lot of soil to cover these tiny seeds. So once I get these out, we'll try not to trip. And we're putting the greens on the outside because those you'll need to get a little bit closer to harvest versus on the inside. And the radishes, since you pull those right out of the ground, those can be in the middle and we can kind of reach over the greens and harvest those. And as we've been working, you've probably noticed that this is a pretty sunny location.
That's what I have.
And most vegetables will do much better in full sun. There are some that are more shade tolerant. We'll talk about that down the road a bit. Some greens like a little bit less direct sun. They might get a little bit sunburnt, or with the heat they'll tend to bolt. But we can talk about that a little bit later when we get into some of the actual growing. But now for seeding. All right, so these are the kale and mustard mix. So as you can see, they're pretty small. We're going to use a technique that's, I call it the sprinkling technique. So I'm not actually going to be spacing them particularly, but I am going to keep them in this nice row versus like a broadcast seeding, which you can also do with greens like this. But for this, I'm just going to, as I go down the row, kind of what I'm doing, I have the seeds between my fingers and I'm just kind of rolling them like this as I move. And so that kind of allows the seeds to fall somewhat regularly.
Something else we're supposed to be, what else are we doing today?
And again, these can be quite close together because they're going to be harvested when they're young, and they're quick. They don't need much in the way of space.
My husband and daughter are not going to get everybody fed.
So for covering these, the mustard and kale seeds that are now in here, again, it's a very shallow trench, and I'm just going to gently kind of cover them up so that they do have some soil coverage, but not, you really don't want more than about 1/4 of an inch. And these will, if you do just sprinkle them on the surface and keep that surface moist, they don't necessarily need to be fully buried in order to germinate. So if you use that broadcast sowing and just kind of sprinkle them out, they should do just fine. Okay, so radishes, give you a look. You can see these seeds are a little bit bigger. We're still going to space them pretty close together. You can always thin these out if they're too close. One thing, some seed companies will tell you what the germination rate is. Radishes in general tend to have a really good germination rate. But again, I'm going to use a similar sprinkling technique and try to get them about 2 inches apart. Again, if you drop more than one seed in that 2 inches, don't fret. And I've finished my little handful of seeds here, and since they're so small, since I don't have my seed packet with me, I'm going to put a little marker where I stopped so I can pick up where I left off.
All right, so let's talk about watering. We've got the seeds in the ground, and a good lesson I like to remind people is that we want the soil to be moist, but we don't want to drown the seeds. A lot of people will just add water, which sometimes is actually counterproductive, because when these seeds and the plants are just soaked, they can't grow, they can't do what they need, they can't get that oxygen CO2 exchange in effect. So one of the things I like to do is I'll take my finger and stick it in the soil, and if it feels like a sloppy wet sponge, you definitely went too much. But if it feels moist, then you're probably just at the right amount. So what you see here in this propagation house, we have trays with cells pre-made. So we will put seeds right in these cells, and then as they mature and grow, we'll pull the plant out of the cell, put it out into the field. Now, Ariana is going to show us something that's really neat. It's called soil blocks. So instead of having a tray with these cells, you make these cool little soil blocks and plant right into those, and then you take those out into the field and transplant them when the seeds turn into little seedlings. So let's check it out.
So the recipe that we are using calls for 3 parts peat or coir. We're going to be using coir, which is a coconut peat fiber. It comes in a dried block that you then need to soak so that the material is workable. So I've already soaked the peat moss and measured out 3 parts of the coir peat. And then we're going to be using, today we're going to be using vermiculite. You can also use perlite. So we have our organic vermiculite. It calls for 2 parts of the vermiculite and then 3 parts of a composted potting soil or compost and potting soil mix. So you can use any kind of container depending on the quantity you want to mix up. I'm using this handy pot from McGee's barn. So here's our 1 part vermiculite. With the dust for vermiculite, it is good to use a mask just so you don't inhale any of the dust particles. And then I'm going to measure out 3 parts of the compost potting soil. So here we have from the Vermont Compost Company. But you can really use any number of brands for this. But of course, we recommend a good organic supplier. So we have our dry mix here, so our compost, vermiculite, and coir peat. And then what you're going to do is just get it all mixed up quite well. The coir is still pretty saturated, so I'm not going to add any water just yet, but ultimately we want the mixture to have we want it to be able to have some structural integrity so that it'll hold its form in the soil block. So we want to make sure there's enough water so that it will hold that. And that's also where the compost is really essential, right? That's our structural element. So we'll get this mixed up. We'll add a little bit more water. Somebody once told me you want it kind of the consistency of like a really thick peanut butter. So I think that might be a little thin. So add just a little bit of water. Again, kind of a little bit at a time so that it doesn't get too soggy. As you can see, it's starting to, if you kind of squeeze it, it's holding its shape, but you'll want to be able to kind of toss it without it breaking apart. So it looks like we need to have a little bit more water. And then we'll do a little test to see if our consistency is about there. And it's nice to have a mixing container like this that has a wide base versus working in a bucket, though in a pinch a bucket works just fine. So we're going to be using these soil blockers. They are available from a number of suppliers, I think initially developed by Elliott Coleman. So we're going to press the soil blocker firmly into our mix. So you can see I'm gonna kind of smooth off the bottom, and then I'm gonna have a tray ready. So then I'm gonna press down on this lever, and then you pull the soil block up, and voila. So we've finished making the soil blocks. You can see them here in the tray. And so now we can start seeding. What's nice about the soil blocks is that the contraption itself has a dibble in it. So there's a little indentation, which is perfect for plopping your seeds in. And then you can go back over and just give them a little dusting to cover those seeds. They'll take up water from the bottom so that you don't damage the tiny little seedlings.
Well, I hope that this has been helpful and you are so excited and feel more prepared to get your garden set up and ready. Now, if you would like to help another family get their garden practice set up and ready, visit us at NOFA-NJ.org and you can learn more about some of our partnered cooperative garden projects. So we've got the Bullock Gardens, we've got Kata Crops in Atlantic City, Isles in Trenton, and Newark Conservancy in Newark. And just by donating $50, you will help a family get the seeds and the garden plot and someone to stand by and help educate them to enable that family to grow their own food. What a wonderful way to help the community and help make sure that food is available to everyone. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope you're learning and getting all sorts of good stuff out of this. And I look forward to seeing you on our next episode where we're focused more on transplanting and getting the stuff out into the field and getting closer to having some delicious food to eat. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.